All right, welcome to Halitics on Tuesday, and I'm really delighted for a second day in a row having a great West Coast guest. But our guest today, Vernon, is actually on the West Coast. Yesterday, Arlen, although from Monterey, is in actually, he's from Southern Cal, just like you. Vernon grew up, I think, in 12 Oaks, or what is it called? Oaks? What is that?
Thousand Oaks.
Thousand Oaks, somewhere around there in I guess, the valley of
Yeah,
LA.
Stanford Anna Valley area, I think.
He is now in Vermont. Okay, so he
Hmm.
escaped the recent rains, just as I guess all of northern. There was some raining, but there was a lot of rain in Vermont earlier this summer. So I guess there's really no way to avoid it. Vernon with us. We were talking off the air, and I really was like a little delayed, not because of tech issues, which is usually the reason. But Vernon, you and I don't know, you feel the same way. I can talk to you all day. You're just a great raconteur and very interesting person to speak with, and a lot of really intelligent commentary that isn't the same as mine, so it makes it especially exciting.
Well, I think, as they say, I think that we agree on the goals, as people would say. I don't think that we always agree on the way we see things. Clearly, one is with respect to your climate change. You think it's an existential threat. I have no qualms about modifying our behavior, but I think that you use a lot of emotive conjugations when you talk about it.
You figured
Attach.
that out. You caught that. You mean like the new Holocaust, or
Yeah. And
which I've
the
been.
Holocaust one, I think, is disrespectful to the Holocaust. But
That's really, I appreciate that. I actually read an article by, and we can talk about that more. We weren't playing it. By the way, today it's Boritics. It's not Halitics. We were talking about the name Halitics. I like Boritics, but yeah, it doesn't have that L, so it doesn't
yeah,
quite
yeah.
rhyme, but it's excellent as well. Boritics. I actually read an article by, I believe it was a Jewish person. I'm culturally Jewish, certainly born Jewish, who was using the term Holocaust, who felt that it was appropriate to
Yeah.
refer to what we're doing to the
I
planet.
think we've become too sensitive, Hal.
Oh, so you were
So, I
being
mean,
facetious
no,
when you said.
but no, a little, not quite facetious, but I think that a lot of people are sensitive to the use of the term Holocaust and would see it as being disrespectful to that term. You know,
I mean, it's a fire, right? I mean, Holocaust ultimately means fire. I hear that. I don't know what to say. I mean, if you feel hurt or insulted, I would say it.
if you're not insulted, no,
Well, but
but
others
I think
may
there
feel
would be some
differently.
people of the Jewish. Well, Jewish people are interesting because it's not necessarily religious,
Right. Well, look,
and
I use
so
the term Shylock to refer to what do you call it? Loan sharks, right? Loan
uh-huh.
sharks. And I've had some Jewish people who don't like that, but Shylock was a loan shark. I mean, he was. I mean, he's the world's most famous loan shark.
Well, like I say, I think that we're way too sensitive, but that was one of the things that came up, and I don't think it is. I personally don't think it's a Holocaust, but and I have no problem changing our behavior. I've been recycling since the early '90s. When I moved in '97 and remodeled the inside of where I lived, I put in all CFLs very early in the game. From time to time, I share my utility bills online to show you that I've got a below average use of utilities. I'm very low down there on the gas thing. I just think that I understand the use of your emotive conjugations. It's framing the conversation to get attention to it. But I think it does a disservice to the discussion. And I think it takes it out, from my perspective, it takes it out of a scientific realm. But
Well, that's
that's my
really, that's you're right about the use of framing. That's why
yeah.
I do it. But I think where we disagree is I don't think it's hyperbolic. I mean, I
Yeah,
really believe we are living in a human caused, human created Holocaust that from which there is no escape.
yeah, yeah. I don't think that let's see, how do I want to say it? I got involved in this in the early 90s. And my family hated it that I always billed myself as a proud high school dropout, because my actual training is I'm in what they call an ABT, all but thesis. And I wrote 60% of a PhD thesis in physical chemistry. And in roughly 90, when the whole ozone hole debate came about, I'm reading all the same stuff that you do. Okay. And I'm going, how does one decipher all this? And I thought, you've got an advanced degree, you got a master's in physical chemistry, you're TA for chemistry, you figure it out. And so I've been digging into this stuff, and a lot of the arguments that are raised now were things that came up for me as questions in the 90s and stuff. Anything from, is the planet getting warmer, all that bad, to, is the melting that we're seeing accelerating, or is that just part of a physical process when you understand the dynamics and mechanics of ice melting, to what's the correlation between the carbon dioxide concentration and temperature change? How do you all that stuff came up for me. So I've been digging into it for 30 years, and I'm not saying that you haven't, and I'm not arguing with anyone else. So there are two basic points of view. One is that the carbon dioxide is the thermostat that controls the temperature, which controls the climate. And that's one of the places they have problems, because in the early days, it started out as global warming. That lost traction. It shifted to climate change. In the Clinton era, they tried to convert to something called global climate disruption. That's everything's climate, everything's bad. And that didn't stick. And my problem with the discussions is, when you talk about climate change, everyone they say climate change, but talk about global warming and carbon dioxide. So the conversations exclusively about global warming under the guise of calling it climate change. That's always what I consider the sleight of hand that gets thrown out there. Okay. And I don't disagree with you that the planet has increased in temperature, whether it's cataclysmic, as you like to say. I don't know. We are 2 to 3 degrees below the geological historical climate temperature right now. We're actually in a cool period. 60% of the time the planet's been around, if you believe the proxy data. The climate's been considerably warmer than this. The temperature range of the planet, has been something like a 30-degree fluctuation between hot and cold. And in analogy to the human body, if you're saying, I've got a raging fever, and went and told your doctor that your temperature had gone from 98.6 to 99.9, he'd say you're a hypochondriac. And that's kind of the range we're in. So those are my main things. The other model for climate change or global warming is that we have these dynamically non-coupled, non-linear systems that we don't fully understand, all working together. And those are the questions we need to sort out. And you would say, you talked about electric cars. I think what gets, I just had an article that I looked at, is Tesla finally released from the production line pollution, if you will, and from 3 gigatons, can't remember what the measurement was, to the production line, it jumps it up to 33 now. It might pollute less from what we know than the 33, but then you've got the down the line, dealing with the waste, the mining of the lithium for the batteries. There aren't that many Teslas and electric cars out there right now. You start talking about 180 million Americans, because not all Americans are adults. That's a huge, that really digs into the environment, not talking about the rest of the world. We're a small percentage of the population. So I think it's kind of like, to me, like throwing all the garbage in the closet, ignoring all the questions. And if you really care about our human contribution to the destruction of the planet, then I think you need to talk honestly about everything.
Well, I agree with you. There's really not a lot there that you said with which I disagree. I don't particularly like the term global warming because I remember a friend of mine who is not a scientist but has a degree in forestry and is a professor who said to me, yeah, the thing about saying global warming, it sounds like you're sitting around a nice pot-bellied stove keeping yourself warm, and that's just not what's happening. So I don't like that term. I don't like the term climate change because I agree with those who say, and I think you've said this, although I may be wrong, Vernon, the climate is always changing. It's never, in fact, the only constant, right, is change. We know that.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be climate change. So but yet I use terms like, the climate cataclysm or I think you said catastrophe. You may have used that term or you were using it.
Yeah.
And I use those terms, and then you say they're too hyperbolic or exaggerated or what have you. So
you say the planet is burning up too, and I always ask you what burning up means.
Well, I show you pictures of fire, right? I mean, that's my answer. Is there's actually fires that are
the problem with that
secondary to it, but it's not just. And let me just keep talking for just a moment longer. So I was hoping we would. I had planned. Let me say it differently. I had planned we would talk about a better way to pick leaders because one area where Vernon to start, and we will. But since we got into the conversation about the climate, and by the way, I agree with you also that yes, and I have 2 Teslas. I've talked about that a little bit, and I noticed, by the way, my electric bill went up significantly. Of course, I was wondering why is because you were talking about you have a lower electric footprint than most people, and we always did, but now we've seen it go up significantly. But that's because we charge the vehicle at home. So what we should do, and we haven't, Vernon, what would be ideal is to put solar panels on our roof. Something Billy Sunshine's done, and he charges his Nissan Leaf with the electricity that he generates from that clean green disc in the sky. That said, even there, obviously Teslas have a lot of issues with other problems with the environment, like the mining, which is not done. Which is always going to be a problem. You can't do mining cleanly, but it could be done less dirtily than it's done now. And even the solar panels, they ultimately last only so long, and then they have to be, whatever you can possibly do, probably recycle some of the parts, some of the components, and throw others out. So there's no ideal solution. It's just we're trying, as you said yourself, to reduce the amount of waste and to reduce the amount of CO2 and methane and whatever else we pump into the atmosphere.
I'll throw 2 other things in there. I don't like it is true, and I agree with it, that the climate's always changing, and you got to talk about whether you're talking about short-term climate changes, because the NOAA defines climate, and you, to your credit, you put that in one of your shows, climate long-term changes in weather patterns. NOAA defines that as 30 years or longer. So you have geological timescale climate changes, those that span millions of years. You got 30 years or longer. So I don't like that as an argument. The climate's always changing because it's lost its effect. I mean, it's kind of, that's the talking point. And even though it's true, and even though a talking point may be valid, when it gets to the point that it gets tossed into that barrel of talking points, it loses its power.
Well, also, it's always changing, but generally the changes are much, much, much slower than what we've observed. I mean, we've seen, a significant steady rise with an actually accelerating rise in average temperatures over the past 45 years or so.
What did I say? Nothing up this sleeve, nothing up this sleeve. The climate's changed. We've seen an acceleration of the rise of temperature. It always goes back to temperature after you throw in climate change. That's my problem. What are the weather patterns? What metric do you use to define weather over a 30-year period?
Well, I just said wasn't you talking about weather? I was talking about temperature. But climate is really an aggregation of weather over a period of time. It's not, you can't separate the two. They're not two distinct things.
No.
The weather comprises ultimately the climate.
Right. But so temperature is one of many
Correct.
variables.
Agreed.
And that's what I'm saying is people talk about climate change, and immediately there's two things that happen, Hal. Immediately behind climate change, they point to the fact, but look at how rapidly the temperature's rising. And then any particular weather event that comes up, like the current hurricane, or your salmon up there in the Puget Sound, okay, or then it all gets thrown into see the climate's changing, and that's a weather event, a catastrophic event. The Maui fires, they're coming out that these are just failures in the electrical system. And my contention would be is you can say that those are a problem because of climate change, but there's nothing that kept humans from keeping that brush cut down. There's nothing, all that stuff was avoidable, and you can't attribute that, in my opinion, to the rise in carbon dioxide. You can, but that's kind of silly.
But don't you think, Vernon, that the fact that there are some weather events and some, extreme, I don't know, whatever. Yeah, again, extreme weather. I don't like to repeat myself, but yeah. Don't you think the fact that there's some extreme weather can be explained by non-anthropogenic causes? That doesn't prove or even imply that no extreme weather events are caused by anthropogenic, are caused by anthropogenic reasons or from anthropogenic activities.
I think you need to show me how it was. See, I have a hard time until you can explain to me how 1 degree or even 2 degrees centigrade change in the ambient temperature, the climate, the ambient air temperature leads to more hurricanes, more severe hurricanes, more this, that, or whatever. It's like voodoo. You saw the volcano spew lava, and it's because you didn't sacrifice a virgin.
Well, I mean, there's an awful lot of scientists, and again, I'm not one of them, and you have a scientific background that I don't have, Vernon, but, I think it's been explained that the warmer, 1 degree Celsius is the average, right? It's not it's not in every part of the world. It's only 1 degree.
Sure.
And so you have places like the Caribbean and now the Southern Pacific where the temperatures may be significantly warmer than 1 degree, the water temperatures, because that's, where the concentration of the sun, of the, gases, greenhouse gases have led to hotter temperatures in those areas. The Arctic is significantly warmer than 1 degree Celsius than normal. And you just need 1 degree or less to go from, 0 degrees Celsius where ice is stable, or minus 0.5 degrees Celsius where ice is stable, to plus 0.5 degrees Celsius where it melts. So yes, 1 degree can be very significant. And when it comes to the water capacity of air, warmer air can indeed carry more water, and warmer water is lighter than colder water. So you have a double barrel when the air and the water are warmer. The air absorbs, or more water evaporates into air that can absorb more of it. And then when it reaches land and there's a sudden shift in temperature, you get the storms like the one we saw, the one we saw in SoCal. So let me see. I actually got a video here. Let me play this real quick. I got a call or a text from someone who said third-party media is the way to go, or something. I don't know, third-party something. So they're saying, yes, put on more videos, I guess. So here, let's just play this real quick. I'm going to see if I got it in the right spot. We may have a moment of quiet here, Vernon, and then I'll have you comment.
Historic storm that swept through Southern California. The LA area is seeing major damage and floodwaters. Overnight storm alerts stayed in effect for millions as Tropical Storm Hilary moves north. But already, multiple daily rainfall records have been shattered in the southwestern part of the state. And let's look at this now. New video into our newsroom this morning. This was the scene overnight in Cathedral City. This is just outside of Palm Springs. Roads are flooded, and as you can see, cars have just been abandoned. In this video, it's clear how fast and strong the flash flood is pushing through the area. Jobina at the live desk this morning with more. Hi, Jobina.
Hi, Reggie. Thank you. Hilary is the first tropical storm to hit California in more than 8 decades, and much of the damage is expected to become clear at daybreak after Hilary pushed into Southern California with fierce winds and heavy downpours. The national.
All right, I'm going to stop it right there. I thought I always like to give credit to the media when I think they do a good job. Vernon. So I thought that was a well-produced segment, and you could see all the damage. I think what the difference is, what I would argue is the difference between this and why I think it's much more easily attributable to human-caused climate change is because of that once in 8 decades, right? It's been 8 decades since the last tropical storm hit that area. And so that's rain. That is a fire can start from many causes. And the one in Maui was, I believe, due to a power line. So you can't say that was even, the climate. That was just something that people did. Now, people are still to blame for it. All the brush, the reduction in agriculture, invasive grass. That's not climate. But once in an 8 decade storm, that's the climate. What we saw in Beijing this summer, the most rain they've had in 140 years. That's the climate. So that's where I would draw the distinction.
That was a typhoon that brought that in, as you know, just like the hurricane.
Okay, well, call whatever you want, but they had more rain than they'd had in 140 years in Beijing.
I got it. So I'll put Beijing aside for a second. Let's talk about Palm Springs. Okay, 8 decades. Okay. How many climate cycles is that?
I don't know how many. Every 4 or 5 years you have a El Nino, I guess is what you're referring to.
Well, no. Remember I said earlier, NOAA defines climate is 30-year changes in weather patterns over 30-year periods. Okay, so that's 2.5 weather cycles. Okay, so maybe you have, if you go another 80 years out and have another one again, looking at climate cycles, we could have a hurricane like that once every 80 years. And my objection to the whole global warming part of it, or the fact that it's anthropogenic based on global warming, is would have to go back those 80 years and see how much of a temperature difference you had and explain to me from a scientific standpoint how that would account, how you would have a hurricane like that 80 years ago when the planet was cooler, according to you. And now you have another one. Now, was it more severe or not? I don't know. And usually in science, you need 3 different samples to kind of get an idea of what's right, what's wrong. So listen, I don't deny the weather event that happened. If we had 5 hurricanes over the next year, 5 years or whatever, and they totally stopped, that would be an anomaly, but then you'd have to look and see if that repeated itself.
Well, you're listening to Halitics, Bortics this morning, afternoon, whenever you're getting a chance to view. Hope you will take a moment, if you haven't yet, to click subscribe. Click the bottom right square in your screen if you've got annotations on. They are on by default. So unless you turn them off, which I do all the time, you'll see it. And hopefully you'll click like as well. I'm not going to convince you. We've been through this back and forth, but I would say this: if it got cooler, if we saw the temperature start to drop, and we weren't having year after year that was hotter than the year before and the hottest we've had on record, And I would start to reconsider. I mean, the data is I base my view that we are living through the human Holocaust for the planet. I base it on what I've read, based on what other what scientists have said. The great majority, the consensus. I know we can argue if there's really a consensus. I would say there is, and based on what I observe, and if my observations change, and if the experts change their minds, I hope to believe I would change as well.
Hal, I'll accept that. What I'd like to see is your lab notebooks that you've kept your last 55 years, so that I know that your knowledge of the change that you'd experienced was quantified. That's our issue.
There was a guy in the New York Times who had been living in the Rockies there was an article about him living kind of as a hermit at the top of some pass at 11,000 feet in Colorado. And he had been keeping notes since the 70s, and they showed a precipitous drop in snowfall and a precipitous rise in temperatures right around the turn of the millennium.
So, in fact, he has been keeping records for less than 2 full climate cycles.
Okay. Well, I mean, look, you're not.
I just want you to hear that, is if you're talking about climate, you're talking about 30. I didn't make that definition up, by the way. Okay. And there are many climate events that are cyclic, like El Nino and La Nina. Okay. Those are specific weather events that have shorter climate cycles that are part of the total climate picture. And all I'm saying, if someone's going to make a claim that climate's changing, you have to have something to work from. Clearly, we can say the temperature's changing. Okay, you and I have no question or argument there. It's gone up. Okay, and you can see it measurably. And we can have some other dialogues there if you want some particular point in time. But give me a metric, like for example, what weighting do you give to the rainfall? What weighting do you give to the temperature? What weighting do you give to the wind patterns? What weighting do you give to the cloud patterns?
I mean, all those factors are together are relevant. They're all part of it, and they all in concert show significant changes in the climate that are wholly consistent with the theory of anthropogenic global warming, if you want to use the technical term, something that has been predicted since at least the 19th century based on the burning of fossil fuels. But if you want to have a final word, you can have it. And I really do want to move on, because I don't see us getting to getting to any kind of real agreement, except, yes, the changes. We both agree. There's no reason not to burn less fossil fuels. I think we agree on that.
Yeah, listen, you do what you can. It's a science in its infancy. My last comment would be, if climate is consistent of weather patterns, what I will tell you right now is that we've gotten no better at predicting weather. And you're going to take issue with that in a second. And I'm going to tell you why. All we've gotten better at is being able to watch what it does from outside, predict, and adjust our predictions in time as the event gets closer. You look at the stuff you look at your climate.com or something, and it'll say no rain for the next 2 weeks. And all of a sudden 5 days it's raining, or rain tomorrow, and it blows away. So, my contention is we can't even predict weather, let alone, we watch it, and we're calling that a prediction. So we're watching it go whatever direction it goes, and it changes. We don't understand the dynamics.
Well, I mean, there's no question that meteorologists get stuff wrong all the time. And I don't know whether you're right when you say the predictions aren't as good as they used to be.
No.
But this story, or this little snippet I just put up, which is from the LA Times, how bad was Hillary, really kind of goes to your point, which is that some of the areas where they were predicting very significant potential damage, such as Los Angeles, made it through, as they say, mostly unscathed. So that results in complaints. I don't know, should we be complaining that there was less damage? But, they're saying the storm was overhyped, which again, I find a little bit ironic or somewhat humorous that they would use those phrases, because I think most of us would prefer not to live through some sort of, Noah's flood type storm. That said, this is consistent with what you're saying, right? Is that the meteorologists really couldn't predict exactly where the storm would hit and how badly any particular area would get it. But they make the point that a lot of SoCal, look, it really was bad. And we saw those cars being overwhelmed by the floodwaters.
No question or doubt about that. Definitely a weather event. Whether that's indicative of climate change, I don't know. And like I say, what we need to do a show. We'll do some data. I'll have some of my own slides, some stuff to show you, because and I want to leave you with one last one. You know who Bill McKibben is?
McKibben, yes, I do. I've seen.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. So I don't like to correct people. I mean, yeah, but you mean the McKibben, and I have my different issues with McKibben as well. I think he's far too closely tied, for example, to the Democratic Party, and not really, recognizing it doesn't seem to acknowledge just how bad it is when it comes to exacerbating this crisis.
Right. This will be a good lead into the next talk about elections. Anyway, according to him, his website is 350.org, and it was all over once we passed 350 parts per million, which was back in 88, 98, 208, 218. We're going on 40 years. The next prediction is unless we started to decrease the carbon output by 2020, it was too late. Didn't make that. So that maybe what we need to start doing right now is planning how we're going to survive the cataclysms that you're predicting.
I think they're happening right now. I mean, I've heard this argument too by Jimmy Dore. To me, the answer is we're right now living through that cataclysm. I believe we may be at 1 million or more climate refugees, thousands, tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of climate-related deaths. We just saw wildfires in Canada that we've never seen before. My answer to you is the scientists nailed it. They were right on, and in fact they often point out that either their predictions have been accurate about, obviously you can't predict tomorrow's weather, but you can predict changes in climate over time, that they've been correct about that, or to the extent they've gotten it wrong, they've understated the changes that we've observed. So
how does a 5-degree increase in temperature lead to the automatic starting of forest fires? Let's throw the virgin in the volcano.
Okay.
I'll help you do it now.
It's clear that you get some areas that are drier again, because you don't have universal consistent changes everywhere. So in Canada, you have hotter, drier weather, and then you sometimes get flash floods. The hotter, drier weather is this specific, is obviously going to lead to more and worse fires than in the past. But I'm going to move on now, because we're not going to agree. I'll have you back and we can debate it again. Vernon.
And I'm not trying to convince you.
You're trying to poke holes in my arguments, just as I'm trying to poke holes in yours.
What I'm trying to say is this is a very complicated system. And there again, my main argument with you, and my main issue with you, is you will take a weather event and it all gets thrown into. I
don't think that's fair, Arlen. I don't think that, I just called you Arlen. I don't think that's fair, Vernon. I actually went on did my live stream last week, and I specifically went through the reasons that we cannot conclude that the Maui fire was related to the climate. And I'm sure you saw that, because I know you watched my videos. So, and I don't mean that facetiously. I know you do. So I'm sure you remember that, but you're kind of, not really ignoring that or avoiding that point.
Can you read my mug?
Yes, I can, but I'm not...
the wrong one here. It says,
I see.
I would like to apologize to anyone I have not yet offended. Okay. Please be patient. I will get to you.
I agree. We're way too offended. You know what? I saw an article by a CNN reporter I'm not a big fan of. I forget her name now, but she wrote an article I really liked where she said I was wrong about trigger warnings. And she was talking about how when she was a professor, when she taught, maybe she wasn't a professor, she taught in college, and she would, warn people, oh, if you read this, there could be, you might get traumatized, blah, blah. So, and she said, you know what? That was wrong. It's like you have to treat people like adults. And if it's good literature, if it's a good film, what have you, people can read it. And if they are a little bit upset, well, that makes it great art in a way, right? So I'm 100% with that. And she also made the point, Vernon, that by doing that, we're treating people, we're infantilizing. And I agree with that too. Or is that infantilizing? Yes.
I got it either way, So my objection is your emotive conjugations. And I think that what happens out of that, for what it's worth, okay, is that when we use emotive conjugations, they may work for a while, but it starts to drift over into the Chicken Little Sky is Falling or The Boy Who Cried Wolf. And I think you may disempower your arguments at that point some. But I don't care if you disempower them or not. I don't.
I don't think I guess where we disagree. I try to use colorful, exciting, entertaining language, but also accurate. So if I'm inaccurate, then I need to correct myself. You haven't persuaded me I'm inaccurate in this case. But
Holocaust and burning up, and that's where this all started, an article where a guy was pointing out using the terms boiling, and then he did a metaphor that or an analogy I didn't like particularly, because he did point out that boiling means 212 degrees, not a couple degrees, and I think that's fine-tuning, slicing the science too thin for the metaphors. Anyway, let's move on to the election.
All right, so we'll do that. I was furiously looking for a photo of the Canadian wildfires. I could say, there's your Holocaust for you, Vernon, but there's really no need to. So this was an article I thought of you as I was reading it because I thought you would be intrigued by it, and you actually anticipated this article. The worse people run for office, it's time for a better way. When you saw that headline, you kind of lighted up and you're like, yeah. So go ahead. Take it away from here.
What Hal showed me this article, and I had not read it, and he started to tell me
New York
about
Times,
it.
by the way, just so folks know, the Sunday Times, I believe.
And it's talking about a lottery system for candidates. And I told him that probably a few years back, I got thinking, we have a lot of people that say we don't have enough parties. The problem is you get too many parties, you get too many people in there, you don't have a representative, anyone that's representative of a majority. So I think that it always has to boil down to the final two people in the race. And so I got thinking, how do you do this? And Hal's telling me about the article, and I told him, well, that's what I was thinking several years ago. As you take elections coming up, anyone that's qualified throws their hat in the ring, and you start doing like bingo. You start, I don't know how many million, and you start reducing it 10% at a time, until you start to get down to a reasonable number to vote for. So everyone has a chance, and so it's not all dependent on who has the most bucks to advertise and all that, and it's most representative of the people. So you can take it from there. So I just thought it was interesting that the article seemed to reflect that. And as my departed wife would say, as people say, you got to put up better candidates, but the problem in this system is you can't make someone run.
Well, it's really
people decide to run.
Right. That's exactly the point. What you just got to there is it's not just the money and all that. It's actually the kind of people who want power are the people we don't want to have power, right? I mean, this attracts people who have what this author Adam Grant from Wharton says is this dark triad, right? So triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy or psychopathy. Again, one or the other, psychopathy, I guess. So narcissism, you only care about yourself, right? Your own needs are the most important. Machiavellianism is you'll do anything, right? You'll do anything to get what you want. And psychopathy is your zero empathy for others. So those are really bad traits. And I don't disagree that we see those in a lot of our leaders from both parties. And we see that willingness to exploit others. We see it all the time, and so much dishonesty. I don't really necessarily, I don't want to point to particular people but I will just say this. I view this as a total bipartisan problem. This is the duopoly, the two parties writ large, without any doubt about it. What I find most upsetting, though, about all of this, so the solution is, if really bad people are attracted to rule, to govern, then maybe we need to figure out a different way. We don't let people decide if they're going to run for office. I think that's true, but there's a second component that I want to get to. It's not just that bad people want to be leaders, but we're really bad, Vernon, at choosing leaders. It's not just that these dark triad people run and want power, but for whatever reason, as human beings, so many of us, and I'm going to accept myself, and I'm sure you would accept yourself, so many of us, for whatever reason, can't seem to see through the snake oil sales. We seem to be, these people make suckers and chumps of us over and over and over again. Why is that? Why can't we see through them, Vernon?
Because we don't do our job. You cannot have a government of, for, and by the people, where the people think that it's sufficient to participate in their government just once every election cycle or something. You need to hold your elected leaders accountable. You need to watch what they do. And I think that Plato said it pretty well. This is a paraphrase from an introduction to his works, where it said that the problem is though our hearts may be sound, our heads are mushy, and in democratic systems, people are dependent on their popularity, and you're not popular telling people you're not necessarily popular when you tell people what they don't want to hear.
What do you say to those who would argue or would quote Winston Churchill for the proposition that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others? So we should choose our leaders because at least then we're deciding who they are. Whereas if it's random, if it's like some type of what they call a lottery system or sortition, then it's not really the people representing themselves through their leaders, through the people they chose.
Well, I would agree with Churchill, is just because it's the best we got, given what we got, it might be worth sticking with, but until we get tired of it and we start to participate, that's what we're going to be stuck with. But I'm also intrigued by it because I think it's really an easy way to complain and let ourselves off the hook. There's always got to be a bad guy, and it's them.
Oh, it's the leaders. Well, but
yeah.
Listen, I think that Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and George W. Bush and Donald Trump are bad people. Yeah, I kind of really do. I think they are. But that doesn't, the fact that we chose them doesn't excuse their bad actions.
Yeah, but it doesn't excuse.
And Barack Obama I have huge issues with. But he fooled me. I got to say, in 2008, I was like, this guy is the real deal. He's going to be fighting for us. AOC fooled me. Maybe she fooled me because there was some sincerity there in 2018 or whenever she first ran. I think it was 2018. And, the system corrupted her to such a degree that she's not on the people's side anymore. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. But yeah, we seem bad at choosing leaders. We're not good at it.
Well, the one that I remember that impressed me was Jesse Ventura when he was governor of Minnesota, when he says, "Hey, it's just simple. If the people want government to pay for it, they're going to have to pay more taxes." That's an honest answer. There's nothing free.
Well, I mean, yes, but who's going to pay those taxes? Where will we get that? Where will we? Who's going to? Yes, for some, and I don't always agree with that either. There are ways that government can be a lot more efficient. We have an incredibly inefficient government.
There.
I mean, the amount of waste in the Pentagon, for example. I know you served in the military, so you have a very soft spot for the Army. You probably would deny that they do anything. There's any mistakes in the Pentagon, Vernon.
No, not at all.
I'm being facetious.
For what it's worth, is I talk regularly to one of the guys that I served with in my unit. We were very good friends. Going to talk to him this Thursday, and he's always on the Pentagon budget. The problem with the Pentagon budget is my same problem I have with climate change, is that everyone talks about the Pentagon budget, which in my lifetime, since I've been, you describe me as a radio personality. Since I've been a radio personality, the amount we spend on the defense as a proportion of our federal budget has done nothing but decrease over the years, gone down from 23%, 24% during the Reagan years, down to about, I think it's around 15%, 14% now. And I'll accept arguments that still might be too much. But it's a shrinking part of a total amount we spend. That's a distraction, which is with our social spending, that's going to take us down. I think, what's his name, David Walker, the comptroller that was appointed by Clinton, has been out beating this drum since 2000. Is that our social welfare spending is growing so rapidly. It's in the mandatory spending, and it's out of hand. It's going to sink us.
Well, just a couple of thoughts on that. One, with regard to the Pentagon budget, I'd have to look at those numbers, but I accept that what you're saying is that the percentage of our GDP that we spend on the military has declined, certainly since when you served in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. But I also understand a lot of the budget, a lot of military spending is off the books, and there's all sorts of fudging going on. Yeah. So we can't be, I don't know how much really less we're spending. I appreciate what you said, that you're willing to discuss, say we're spending too much. We're still spending too much. I'm focused even more on a lot of the waste on these weapons systems that we never use, we don't need, keeping bases overseas that are not keeping us safer, war in halfway around the world that we shouldn't be involved in. But in terms of the social spending, I'm not going to argue with you that we spend too much on the social safety net. My answer to that is because we don't do enough to promote an environment where there's good jobs. And we don't incentivize companies to create jobs where people can live decently. We spend an awful lot on and I think wastefully, on emergency room visits rather than on universal single-payer healthcare, which would save us money, a lot of money in the long run. We spend far too much on guaranteeing, enough calories for people who work at Walmart, because their pay leaves them below sufficient income to live a decent life. We have to provide all kinds of housing relief because we don't have enough houses and apartments that people can afford. I mean, we waste an awful lot of money on social support services because our economy doesn't work for and leave out the poor for a second, doesn't work for struggling, working, and lower middle class people.
Hal, I gotta come clean with you because I love you. Okay, I've got my own little pet name for you when I discuss you with my brother. I hope you appreciate
I
it.
do. I'm glad. I love that
It's
you're discussing me with your brother.
it's headline Hal.
Hey, listen, I've done this for a long time. This is my shtick, man. This is my act.
This is almost, we almost need to do a Joe Rogan one of these.
Okay, get me his numbers, man. Get me those millions of subscribers, Vernon. Instead of I'm still down in the hundreds, which I appreciate. You got me over the 100, by the way, Vernon, and some of his friends.
I twisted some arms.
You did. You must have. I bet you went over to their house and you said you weren't leaving until they subscribed to get people to do this.
I says he needs to get over 100 for sure, and we got you to 100. I think I got you to 105. And now you're back on your own and growing. Doesn't matter. No, there's a lot. There's a lot to be done there. I don't have any doubt about that. And you know, I think that where my life changed, I can't tell you. Along the way, doing talk radio, I started saying to myself, is this true? What do I know about this? And as I've dug into so many of these things, and that's why the headline part hits me, is I've been amazed by it. It's like people talk about how much is spent on the Pentagon budget, and then you find out that the Pentagon, that the discretionary spending is only a small portion. I think it's about 50% of the total amount we spend, out of which the defense spending comes. I've heard the stuff about medical bankruptcies, and I go, well, wait a second. I can look this up, and you say, well, you find out that there's 1.5 million bankruptcies filed per year. That's going down. It's in the 800,000s or something right now. And I'm thinking, that's a small percentage of the population. Something else is going on here. And then you look at where that data came from, and what you find is that people with medical bills as low as 5,000 are claiming that led to their medical bankruptcy, those kinds of things. So I'm suspect of all these things that get put out there is causes and cause and effect. And we need to participate more in our government and the running of our country. And we need to realize if we want the people to pay for it, they're going to have to pay more in taxes. In fact, the Social Security Administration's trust fund said to be net neutral in our expenditures, you'd have to raise the Social Security, Medicare taxes to 20%.
Well, again, a lot of our expenses that seniors face could be avoided if we had a smarter, more efficient government. And again, another issue we really face, a lot of the problems that we face now that we didn't face in the 50s, 60s, Vernon, when you were coming up, and I think a lot of the older folks, like such as yourself, don't really recognize is a result of massive wealth and income inequality that skyrocketed, started to grow in the 70s and then skyrocketed when the Reagan tax cuts were put into effect. And we've never gone back to the numbers we need. And
I know so you that's believe a big problem.
That. Well, it's true. It's not like I believe it. It's just the case.
Actually, is it? Have you ever read the book What Went Right in the 80s by McKinsey?
Is that, you mean the consulting group that got super fat and rich?
No, he was an economist. I can't remember whether he's from Berkeley or not, but apparently not. Tax revenues, as you know, went up during the 80s. Spending exceeded that. And there's a thing called Parkinson's law that I'm sure you've heard is spending will always increase and exceed the amount allotted for it. And
we had balanced budgets all the way up until I believe Reagan. So so it was the cuts that were a significant factor in the no longer balanced budget. That's one factor, Vernon. Also, let me add this, and then I want to get on to our Democratic friend there in the middle. I don't know if you recognize Hakeem Jeffries. It's hard to. He is the Democratic minority leader. I'm just going to kind of end by bashing the Democrats. So with regard to, so the deficit spending began, I believe, under Reagan. Also, Reagan cut taxes on the wealthy from a top marginal rate, I believe, of 70% to 28%. Now, that wasn't just Reagan. Tip O'Neill went along with that with the Democrats, so they're both to blame. But it was Reagan was the impetus. But he also subsequently raised taxes on the middle class because the cuts led to very significant shortfalls. As I mentioned, we had finally deficit spending. And so poor, struggling, working people like yourself had to pay more to make so that the rich could get obscenely rich.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion we should have. And I'm not rich.
Well, I didn't say you were. I said people like you. I said you weren't. I said people like you had to make up the shortfall so that the rich, already rich, could get obscenely rich.
Do you know that the income inequality between the people in the $10 million income bracket and those richest ones is greater than the income inequality between someone living in poverty and someone making 10 million?
Yeah, I'm sure that's true because that's another thing when you get a tremendous, these tails just go out to forever on the right side of the graph when you have massive inequality. The richest become exponentially richer. It's true.
Yeah, well.
All right, let's play a quick.
That's a whole nother show.
Or several shows.
Yeah.
But I hope you're enjoying. Look, I love talking to you. I really appreciate your compliment.
Absolutely.
Even if we disagree, I never take anything personally. I mean, if you said you suck, I hate your. One of my guests said the other day, she said, "I love your voice, Al," and I'm like, that is how you really, warm the cockles of my heart. But you can say pretty much anything to me as long as it's not I don't like personal insults. I think you've seen that. I don't like the personal insults, but otherwise, which you never do. I've never seen you insult anybody.
You jumped all over me in the beginning.
I've done something. I try not to.
You were brutal, and you know what? Ooh. That's fine. I just handled it like a keto or one of the ones where you.
I apologize. That's fair. That's a fair criticism.
Nothing to apologize for. I get a kick out of it.
I make an effort all the time to really be as to have the conversation always about facts, evidence, policy, never about personalities. There are people that I don't, I think if they're corrupt, like we'll see in a second, it's a different kettle of fish. But, I don't talk to corrupt people. I just bitch about them constantly. So
there's a saying I want to throw in real quick that I want you to remember. And that is, you can't awaken a man who's only pretending to be sleeping. And I want to make that distinction between people that are nefarious and know that they're deliberately deceiving, and people that honestly believe what they do, whether you agree with them or not. And that's always a hard one to sort out, because the psychopaths, they're very polished.
I don't know if Hakeem Jeffries is a psychopath. I really don't. But I get so frustrated, Vernon, with people, and I think this is such a problem on both sides, who become so partisan that they're blind to the very, very obvious failings of people that they perceive to be on their team. And the teams we have now seem to be Team Democrat, Team Republican, not what I would much prefer, Team Poor, Struggling, and Working Class, Team Peace, etc., Team Freedoms, Team Job Opportunities. But that's not what it is. And so let me play this real quick from Jeffries, who every single Democrat voted for. And you may not have a problem with what he says, Vernon, but I have a huge problem with this. So let me.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, I represent the 8th Congressional District in New York. It's wonderful to be here in Israel with a tremendous delegation of Democratic members of the United States House of Representatives, reinforcing our strong and ironclad commitment to the special relationship that exists between the United States and Israel, a relationship, of course, that is anchored in our shared democratic values and our shared strategic interests.
All right, I want to stop that. So I don't know what we spend. Maybe it's billions to help Israel, I really don't know. There's no mention, there's no recognition of the persecution, the oppression of the Palestinians. And this is because, Vernon, it's just purely politics. And yet every Democrat voted for this guy. He has the support of AIPAC. That's his number one contributor is AIPAC. Number two is the financial services industry. I guess my question to you, and I know there are a lot of Jewish people who are like, well, okay, better he support Israel than not. Here's my question. If we have two political parties that are beholden to the financial services industry, to the fossil fuel industry, to the corporate behemoths and the billionaire class, how can we hope for better in our society?
No, the only way we can hope for better is to have politicians who are committed to the people. And one of the analogies I like to use for politicians in Washington is I like to think of them as the Democrats and Republicans is kind of like good cop, bad cop. They're both in the same game. And so if you're on the far Republican side, they're your good cops. They're standing up for you, and the Democrats are bad and vice versa. And that's the way I've kind of come to see it personally. And the only way you can deal with that is to get honest people in there. And
that's why the lottery, right? That's why the sortition.
Yeah.
That's why, because it would seem that we're not good at picking leaders. We live in a system that causes us to become very partisan very quickly and to overlook the gaping warts, the enormous warts and boils on the face of our own leaders, to ignore them completely and to focus on every imperfection or perceived imperfection on the other side. All right, let me end with this. This is my guy. I don't know if you know this, but I talk about Cornel West, Dr. West. I love your quick take before we go. Let me play this for you. It's
But
brief.
let's just be very honest. We live in a moment of such overwhelming spiritual decay, lack of empathy, lack of imagination of what it's like to be in the shoes of somebody else, to walk a mile in those shoes, get inside of somebody else's skin, get out of your egocentric predicament, get beyond your silo, get beyond your little narrow truncated community and get a sense of what the world is actually like. There's a whole lot of different people out there.
All right. Now, you wouldn't say it quite that way, but I feel like those sentiments are very similar to what I hear you saying a lot, Vernon.
I think that he does it in a little bit different way and does it more focused on the United States of America, the country that we are. But that's Vivek Ramaswamy.
Oh, you do, Vivek. I was going to ask you that. So say the name again. Vivek Ramaswamy.
Ramaswamy.
Ramaswamy. I had the S and the A. So I got to look more into him. I know he's either 2 or 3 now behind Trump.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Let's save that for another day.
Because he's 38. That's one of the things I like about him because and I tell all of the young people, young adults, it's their world, their battles to fight, and the only way they're going to fight them in the political world is to get their people in. And he's full of energy. Someone asked him, shouldn't he think about running when he's older? He says, well, who knows? I might not have the energy I have now. And whether the system corrupts him or not, he's really someone I think that would make a good president. I got a renewed respect for Cornel West on the Joe Rogan interview of him. I mean,
I haven't seen that. I got to go watch. I don't, look, he's a competitor. I can't watch. No, I wish he were. I wish he were a real competitor of mine. But I'll go look at that, Vernon.
Well, it was a great interview. I think that Cornel is probably more on the communistic side.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know that his ideas will work. It's the main thing there. It sounds good, but there's always got to be someone to pay the bills, and whether we don't know what's going to work. So, anyone but I'll say anyone but Trump or Biden. I think that the Trump is an interesting. That's a whole nother conversation.
Would you like, you live in California, so people say, you know, your vote doesn't really matter because it's going to be a Democratic state. If you lived in a purple state, if you lived in, I don't know, Florida or what have you, would you still vote for Ramaswamy in the general, or would you say, no, I got to hold my nose? And I don't know who I'm not saying you would vote for Trump. You might not. You might vote for Biden for all I know. But would you still vote for the alternative candidate?
You know, Hal, what I told you, their world, their battles to fight, so that when in 2016, I wasn't going to vote, but my wife passed away, and she would have voted for Trump. So I voted for Trump to honor her. And as I told my daughter and everyone else in California, it doesn't matter. And then my daughter has me tagged as a rabid right winger. And so I told her in 2020, I'd vote for Biden to show her it's your world, your battles to fight. It doesn't matter in California. So I voted for Biden. In both cases, my vote didn't matter. I wasn't going to vote because it is their world, their battles to fight. I think I'd still vote for Ramaswamy.
Yeah, I would vote for West. I actually don't. I certainly don't like Trump. I'm not carrying any brief for Trump. I think the very legitimate. I mean, I think what happened on January 6th and before was illegal as far as I'm concerned. Especially the attempts to overturn the results via the call to Raffensperger in Georgia. To me, that's really the smoking gun. And I'm not. I think Trump is really bad. I don't know that I'd call him a right winger. He's sort of more populist in certain ways. Yeah. And I don't, I don't know that he's, in terms of policy, I think he's worse, I guess, than Biden, but not so much worse, or Biden's not that much less bad that
The question to ask that I always tell people is why the rabid support for Trump. This is the old question, the symptom versus the actual malady, and Trump is just a manifestation of a country that's divisive in its politics and the way it sees things, and people that are unhappy with the way it is. And so people can blame it all on Trump. If things were zinging along from the lottery system we talked about earlier,
He'd have
probably
no
wouldn't have risen.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to let it go at that. Thank you so much. It's always great to talk to Vernon. My honor to have him on. My honor to have you